Welcome to Conversations with Writers. I'm Andy. I'm a writer and a writing instructor in higher education. And this is an educational YouTube series intended to catalog writing strategies and philosophies through conversation with other writers. Kirk Hazen earned his BA in English and French from Clemson University in 1992, a master's in English from North Carolina State University in 1994, and a PhD in linguistics from UNC Chapel Hill in 1997. He joined West Virginia University in 1998. As a professor of linguistics and a Benedum Distinguished Scholar, Hazen studies dialects, specifically social varieties in the U.S. South and Appalachia, where he has conducted research over the last 29 years. As founding director of the West Virginia Dialect Project, he has guided undergraduates through the research enterprise of funding from both the NSF and the NEH, earning WVU's top research mentoring award. In addition to articles and book chapters, he has authored An Introduction to Language, published by Wiley in 2015, and Identity and Ethnicity in the Rural South, published by Duke in 2000, co-authored Dialect Change and Maintenance on the Outer Banks, published in 1999, with Walt Wolfram and Natalie Schilling Estes, and co-edited Research Methods in Sociolinguistics, published by Wiley in 2014, with Janet Holmes. Most recently, he is the editor of Appalachian Englishes in the 21st Century, published by WVU Press in 2020. And this is my conversation with Kirk. Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm hanging in there. How about you?
Pretty much the same nowadays.
What are you working on now, and what motivated the project?
I am working on a few different projects, which is very normal for me. It's just the way I work on different ones. One is a paper that talks about how quotative be-like came into Appalachia and how it developed. This is where you introduce a quote with, "I was like, no, I'm not going to go." And this is often seen in the US as a California thing, but it clearly came in to at least West Virginia after the 1980s and took off like wildfire. So it's a paper talking about that process. And believe it or not, there's actually a very involved literature on that bit of language. In recent years, I mean, over 100 publications. So there's a lot to work on there. And then also writing up chapters, material for language change in Appalachia. Audra Slocum, a curriculum and instruction professor, and I are working on a project right now where we interview teenagers at different schools in West Virginia and then make comparisons. So we're looking at how academic orientation affects, or at least correlates, with their language production, what they actually say out loud. And we're finding that the normal social things that might affect someone's dialect are there to some extent, but it's amazing how much the actual orientation to school or away from school is affecting people's productions. Of course, these are 8th and 9th graders, so they're in the thick of school or not school as a kind of orientation that's real to them. So those are the main projects. I have a couple other side ones where I'm just revising a draft of basically dialect study in the South, an overview, and another one on the other one's on sociolinguistics in the US as an overview. There's all the one thing publishers make money off of in linguistics are reference works. So there's an endless supply of handbooks of reference works. Well, so one's for an encyclopedia-esque thing online. And I say encyclopedia, but the article's 8,000 words. And the other is, no, that one's 10,000 words. The other one's 8,000 words. And that's for a handbook of sociolinguistics around the world. I'm writing the chapter on sociolinguistics in the US. So those are all different things I juggled. They're at different stages. The quotatives one has been a project for 12 years now. It needs to really go home. It needs to go away. It needs to go live somewhere else. So I'm hoping to get that out the door, but also it's like either the anxiety or the monster under your bed. You want it to go away, but it's been there so long, it can stay longer, can it? So anyway, those are my current projects.
I can't wait to read them. What have you learned about yourself through the scholarly writing process and or research process, and particularly with working with Appalachian Linguistics?
I have learned about myself that I am terribly inefficient in writing, and that I can produce many words that will never see actual daylight. I have, like for the quotatives paper, I have overwritten that for well over a decade. And if I would have simply said at the beginning, hey, here's an iffy paper, some mid-range journal, please take this, I could have written maybe 4 to 5 other papers. But and the thing is, it didn't get better the more I wrote it, it got worse. It should have been the thing where I just said it, took everything away and just started from scratch, and it would have been a lot more efficient. So I learned that I can get myself down rabbit holes and then just dig sideways endlessly. So that's something I want to not do. I clearly have preferences for what I like to write about. Those preferences do not align with what is always popular within certain realms of linguistic writing. And that, it's some things are much sexier for journals than other things. And I like to describe language and social patterns, and that isn't always, it's seen at, believe it or not, nowadays as old-fashioned in lots of ways, especially the kind of quantitative approaches I do. And I learned that about myself. So, do I update? Do I just do case studies of certain types? So all kinds of questions there. In terms of the research process, I still have a research lab with wonderful undergraduates doing all kinds of work. So we have data galore. Now, how to efficiently get that and report on it is an open question. And report on it so that it's impactful is going to be a question for me and Audrey Slocum and her students, who are also co-authors, her PhD, her graduate students. So yeah, I learned that efficiency really does matter. And part of the inefficiency came from just trying to overproduce. I took a look back this last summer at what number of stuff I did over a number of years. And I realized that I had produced twice as many things as I would need to get an excellent in research for my department, which is, that's cool, but also it's not clear that either the quality was improved or that it was good as a career move or anything. It was the pace I was working at. It had no positive effect. There are no double excellence.
For you, what's the role of or responsibility of scholarship or scholarly writing? What keeps you generating material? Why write? Why do scholarship?
This is the question that scared me the most. Because, at this point I'm not even technically that old, but I've been doing scholarship writings for 28 years now. And my first publications were my first conference papers were in 1993. My first publications were in 1996. It was last millennium, and at this point, I don't know. I don't know. I don't have any burning need to get one more journal article out, just because I've seen over the last, especially decade, how unless it has some kind of hook with it, that it fits a certain public interest at the time, it is simply going in, like the Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's just going into storage, and it's never going to have any impact whatsoever. But I mean, the role or responsibility for scholarly writing should be to address pressing questions, or at least important questions, of the particular academic fields. And there's lots of them. There's lots of them that we have that are unanswered, but it doesn't necessarily look like progress. It looks like an accumulation of knowledge, and we know more things, but we're so far away from answering questions in satisfactory ways that I'm not sure what we're currently doing is incrementally working towards progress. So somewhat disenchanted with the, not other scholars writing, but the collective progress we may or may not be making. So beyond my current projects, I'm not sure what else I would want to take up next. I'm not sure what else might be on the horizon. There's stuff I know I could write that publishers would be willing to take because I've talked to them about it, but I'm not sure why I would write it or spend the time. It's not going to make money. There's no money involved. It's not going to really be for recognition, like, oh, I got famous writing that book about Appalachian Englishes. No, that's not going to happen. So I'm going to have to find some other motivation. So yeah, I'm at the point where, and maybe it's a post-pandemic thing. Maybe that has affected me and I don't know it, but I'm going to have to find some motivations to take up another large project besides just finishing out what I'm currently doing.
So I think it's really important that you do what you do with Appalachian Linguistics because it draws positive attention to us, to my region, to a place that is often overlooked. And it helps give us voice, even if it's secondhand through your understanding and through your scholarship. That gives us more of a stage, and that reminds people that we exist, and then they're less likely to, propose in Congress that the entire state of West Virginia should be, a medical waste dump.
Yeah. I want that to work that way. I really do. I don't know how much that actually happens though. And that's, I see people who might be English majors or humanities majors in general, appreciate that they come to a self-recognition that what they hear around them, what they heard their grandparents speak is actually of value, that it's legitimate, that it's a real thing. And I just don't know how to make that in the broader intellectual discussion out there. How much is it getting into the Northeast? How much is it getting into other places that it's actually being talked about? Other folks, even in the department, who have had works that are more broadly, like Christopher Parvani's most recent book, that hits a certain political topic, it gets more broadly discussed, and it's a hot button topic issue. It's something publishers are going to compete for. In something like this, I'm not telling necessarily, I'm telling an old story in linguistics with new information. And certainly I'm getting new scholars with that last book, I'm getting new scholars together to do that. And that's all very positive, but I don't know how to make it more impactful elsewhere, or even within schools within West Virginia, which are so, the administration, not the teachers are wonderful, but so many administrations are antithetical to this kind of discussion, but they are so swamped with other issues. Yeah, there are so many concerns.
What about taking it to someplace like digital spaces or moving it in that kind of direction? Because we do seem to have more power, even politically, when we're thinking about and moving in those digital spaces like Twitter, like Facebook, blogs, all sorts of different digital platforms that gives us access beyond just our immediate space of existence. Could something like that help create more progress or growth within this discipline or within this idea?
I think it's definitely the way to go, especially for public engagement. I don't know how about this? I don't know what needs to be done to prompt people to ask for it, to look for it. There, in movements for social justice, there are, like with the murder of George Floyd, there's events that make people think, oh, we need to know about these things. And then there are books such as How to Be an Anti-Racist, that then help to fill people's needs to understand a situation better. Isabel Wilkinson's Caste is the most recent book I read, and it was wonderful. And it was super informative, and it's going to be helping my scholarship, especially with Southern dialects and social systems. But it's prompted by a need to know. So it's, I suppose, prompting the need in non-Appalachians that their perceptions of Appalachia are askew and off base is the question. But yes, the digital realms are where we're absolutely going to have to do that kind of public outreach.
When you're struggling in research or in writing for whatever reason, maybe not enough time, not enough ideas, or whatever it may be, what strategies do you use to get yourself back to the page?
Yeah, that's a very real question. Oftentimes it has to do with anxiety about failing while writing. So it's very much a matter, everything in my field is so evaluative. Even when it's the evaluation that is overtly trying to be helpful, it's clearly evaluative about how well this draft is. And, I facilitate between, okay, this might be passable, and oh no, this is just trash. So sort of a midpoint and a low point. And, like with this current paper on quotatives, it's been around so long that yes, I'm going to make it happen, but it's anxiety inducing to even open the file. And okay, here's the reviewer's comments. I just have to make these changes. So my strategy is I have a list of comments. I have somewhat disembodied them. So they're just comments like it's task 37, do these things. And then I read. I like writing. I still like writing. I like reading through drafts, making changes, pacing around the room, saying them out loud, going back and trying it again. But a lot of these changes are sometimes statistical. Sometimes I have to rerun analysis. Sometimes I have to say, oh, no, that's a completely wrong interpretation. And then I have to do other thinking things to get that done. When I wrote my intro to language book called Ever So Craftily, An Introduction to Language, they wanted broad appeal. The main strategy I used there was to imagine sort of straight up visualization of me in front of a classroom, talking to students, answering their questions, and giving that kind of back and forth rapport in writing. So I was just writing the daydreaming in my head for that book. Came out 35,000 words longer than contracted. And we still, it's supposed to be 115 words, came in at 150,000 words. And me and the development editor just kind of shoved it in there and said, no, it's fine. But yeah, that was a strategy there. And that is a much more enjoyable strategy. I got stuff on the page. And when I go back to revise it, when the editors go back to revise it, the question is, how understandable is it for the audience? How well does it convey these points? Do these points need to be broken down more? It's a very narrative style writing. And it is something like imbibing a lecture that is, somewhat back and forth. as reading. But yeah, that kind of writing is much more enjoyable. So one of the challenges I have, and in terms of strategies, is some of my writing is strictly for the public. I do public writing, then I do scholarly writing. Well, I've done enough public writing over the last years, and really since even that intro book, that the scholarly writing is now become extremely difficult for me to do and seem authentic or seem like a scholar, because I've been taking terms and translating them or breaking them apart, and to just do very dense term layering within writing now seems gauche, seems very awkward. And but it's for those genres, that's the requirement. So reading abstracts, reading things within those genres, and then not plagiarizing, but plagiarizing the style in order to the formats, in order to get sentences out with my content. I will straight up read someone else's work, say, that sounds actually really good. Let me take that sentence format and put this content in and just go with that. So yeah, that's another thing I do.
What's your favorite part of the writing or the research process, and why?
So one thing I do like about the entire activity is the multi-stage qualities of it. At some points, it's literally the research where it's me and data and interviewing, and I start with interviews, I go to processing, then I go to what's going on here and describing, and then we go to some kinds of drafts, and that's where I get bogged down. It's like way too many drafts, way too many words. Start writing the finished product, it goes much better. The most straightforward paper I ever wrote was on deletion of consonants at the end of words, and I never presented it at a conference. I simply wrote the paper, sent it off, it got accepted, did some revisions, presented it no, I didn't even present it, and it got published because I didn't do obscene amounts of drafting. And which part do I like? So I like all of it. I really, really like when there's some kind of draft though, and I come back to it and I say, okay, how do we improve here? What do we do? Because there's something to work with. I feel like I'm making progress. So everything from there to, even when I'm editing someone else's, like with Appalachian Englishes in the 21st Century, that edited book, 2020 WU Press, the stage of, we got some drafts. We've gone from abstracts to I got some drafts, like, this looks like a book now. And I can get coherency amongst the chapters, help authors try to everybody sound a little more similar while having your own individual tones, of course. I like that whole stage, even the proofreading part, even the indexing part. I like the sort of thoroughness of it because I have deadlines, I have clear marks. Like I can put in 8 to 10 hours a day and feel like I've done something there, and I can actually plan out number of hours it's probably going to take me at that point. So I guess some kind of control. Plus I'm just involved in words. I'm involved in sentences and writing. And I like those parts because I feel like I have some actual skill after enough years to not necessarily do it well the first few times, but if nothing else, I'm persistent. So something will get done.
What revision strategies or strategy do you find most useful when revising your own work, and why? What sort of problems does this help you solve?
Revision strategies. Avoid traps where you're deluding yourself. I suppose if I had any low-key superpower, it would be self-delusion. I mean that most broadly in my life. And that certainly applies to my writing. So reading anew the works. I all too often know what's coming up in a piece. I will sometimes write the same paragraph in especially in a longer work like a book or even an edited collection, I'll write the same paragraph that I wrote elsewhere because like, oh, there's a good idea. And then I'll find out I wrote the same paragraph essentially twice in two places, and I forgot, or I didn't, I've lost track of where things are. So sometimes I revise backwards. Actually, I do this a good bit. I start at the bottom of the document. I go to I start with the conclusion and I work my way backwards paragraph by paragraph, trying to see, does this actually fit together? Is this actually, supported, introduced by the things that are about to come up as I work myself backwards in there. So I try to do readings that are done differently than they were before. And this is partially why I like indexing, because then what it allows me to do is I get to follow a word through a text and see, am I repeating the exact same information? Do I need to? Like in some works, like Appalachian English is in the 21st century, I expect those chapters to be read independently of each other. So there are times where things do have to be repeated from chapter to chapter, because I can't assume someone reading chapter 7 has read chapter 4. So searching across maybe for key terms and seeing how they get developed through an article or a book, and which is not a linear reading from front to back. So trying to break up that linear reading process. And then if I do have to do, let's say, a discussion section or something where it's one piece and I need to read it from front to back, I do it out loud. If it's an academic paper, I'm pretending I'm at an academic conference and I'm actually presenting it and seeing how does that actually sound. And I give plenty of time in between. I always give, so I guess a very overt strategy I have is I always give things time to rest. I build that into everything I do in terms of writing. If something's due at the end of the month, I make sure that I finish some kind of draft at least a week, if not preferably 2 weeks early. I let it sit for 5 days. I can do other writing projects. I can do other stuff. And then I come back to it because I know I will have Kirk Hazen's brain will not be able to coherently follow the stuff on the page if I don't. It's just whatever reading disability that might be, I can't do it. So I make sure I give time for that to rest, for me to have other words out there. If I have ideal work situations, I read other things. That is where I fall down often, is I don't read enough other stuff. But if I can, I read other stuff and then revise, and that works so much better, especially if it's on similar contents, because then I can contextualize to a broader area and say, how does this connect? Now, when I'm pressed, I sadly don't.
And now that we've gotten into somewhat of the reading aspect, what reading suggestions do you have, and what scholars and or writers you keep in your back pocket?
It's a good question. I do so much article, especially this last year, but for quite some time, I do a lot of overviews or reference, or like, here's the current state of this area of dialectology, of sociolinguistics. That often I'm reading abstracts and like intros, conclusions, and reading over a few graphs. So there's tremendous amounts of skimming I do in sociolinguistics and linguistics more broadly. In terms of books that I can point back to that, oh, this one was impactful, I brought 3 along for show and tell. Now these reach back a while though, which is okay. There was, this one is coming out with a 3rd edition. This is English with an Accent by Rosina Lippitt Green. The 3rd edition has a few different authors with the publisher, and it is coherent and wonderful. It is about dialect discrimination. It is written in a way that it brings in scholarly information, but it's very, very readable for other people. Undergraduates love this book. And it talks about sociolinguistics and social justice. It goes through Disney films and talks about possible uses of dialect to characterize characters, which is always a very fascinating set of discussions in here. So that's one book that where the writing style became, influential in that way. Another one is by John Russell Rickford and Russell John Rickford, father and son. This is Spoken Soul. This was done, I believe, in 2000 after the second Ebonics firestorm in 96, 97. And it is an overview of African-American English, specifically in the US. And it is a hallmark of what you do when you write a popular book on a dialect, because it goes through preachers, it goes through musicians, it goes through artists, it goes through all kinds of pop culture matters with African-American vernacular English, African-American language, and talks about history, talks about legitimacy, talks a little bit about the language rules for the variety, but it also sets it in social context, and it's really well written. And it was super important because it was a response to just incredibly negative blowback about the dialects associated with African Americans in the US. And it was an important book at the time, but it's still important now. So, and then one that is just fun, and it's a topic that keeps coming up that people keep wanting to know about. And I've written about some just because people keep asking. It's about swearing. This is by Melissa Moore. It's called Holy Shit. And there's an asterisk where the I is, so it doesn't really count. And the title is just fabulous because it's also the basis, the foundation for her argument about swearing and the history of swearing, because it's about the religious aspects, actually swearing an oath. And then it's also about excrement. And those are the two things that for the majority of the history of cursing, of swearing, actually form the basis for swears, form the power, the motivation, the sort of lexical sets that people used for cursing, for swearing. And it wasn't until the late 1800s, 1890 or so, that sexual swearing actually became a thing. That's a much later development, and that's what's become more a prominent now. So another book, again, all three of these books, coherent, they're on a topic, they're for public audiences, and they have a purpose, and you can sense that in the writing. So the writing is clear, but there's a reason for it, and it's just something very good to see. Now, in terms of, I do bounce around a lot just out of necessity. I wish if I'm going to better motivate myself to be a writer in academia, I really think I need to take a repose, to step back and do some more reading, because I would probably be hard pressed to give an accurate overview of where the field is, where sociolinguistics is, because it's not a coherent field. It's very much different fiefdoms. But in part, that's because I don't teach a graduate class in sociolinguistics, so I don't have to work through and characterize with students where things are.
Thank you for that lovely reading list, and I'm going to check all of those books out. Thank you so much for making time to hang out with me today. I have learned so much, and thanks for participating in my series.
Absolutely. It was very good to actually think about these questions, because I don't often pause to think about myself as a writer. It's not something many scholars do. It's, I don't think of myself as a statistician either, and there's good reason for that. But, we don't often pause to think, oh, wait, we are writers, aren't we? And even though, that's not something anybody's going to point out in the crowd and say, oh, Kirk Hazen, writer. I suppose that is what we do to do our work. So thank you for inviting me.